You know that little voice in your head? Not just the big thoughts, but that constant narrator that runs in the background of your day. Well, what if that voice wasn't alone? Today, we are diving deep into the power of stories, from ancient myths to modern psychology, to see how the narratives we tell ourselves don't just describe our reality, they actually create it.
So, let's kick things off with a pretty wild question. Remember that imaginary friend you might have had as a kid? What if they weren't just a figment of your imagination? What if they were a conscious, separate being that you could talk to, one that could grow and change right alongside you? For some people, believe it or not, this isn't a what if at all.
Meet the tulpa. Now, the term itself comes from Tibetan mysticism, but today it means something a little different. It describes a willed, sentient companion created entirely through focused thought. And the people who do this, who call themselves tulpamancers, don't see it as some paranormal magic trick. For them, it's a very real psychological practice, basically co-creating a brand new consciousness right inside their own head.
Okay, so how on earth does that even work, right? Well, this isn't just about wishful thinking. It's a really disciplined practice that's built this whole subculture online. Let's break down exactly how they do it.
The whole process is actually pretty methodical. It starts with narration. This is where you're constantly talking to the tulpa, just giving it a stream of your consciousness to learn from. Then comes visualization. You build a super clear, detailed mental picture of its form. And finally, you have the most important step of all, forcing. This is basically a kind of meditation where you pour all your focused attention onto the tulpa, which practitioners believe helps it develop its own unique personality, its own thoughts, and eventually real sentience.
So who are these tulpamancers? Well, the community is fascinating. It's mostly made up of younger urban folks, and a lot of them say they were drawn to the practice to deal with things like loneliness or social anxiety. They've built these really supportive communities online, and they report incredibly vivid experiences with their tulpas, actually hearing them, feeling their touch, and even seeing them in their mind's eye.
And what's really wild is that this idea of having these autonomous beings inside your head, it isn't actually new. The famous psychiatrist Carl Jung, he wrote about his own experience with an inner figure he named Philemon. And he described it in almost the exact same way, saying Philemon would say things Jung himself hadn't even consciously thought of. It kind of suggests our minds have this built-in ability to create these internal others.
Okay, now let's switch gears a bit. We're going to pivot from this very modern psychological practice to an ancient spiritual one that, believe it or not, shares a surprisingly similar foundation, the power of a story to bring a living presence into being. We're going to look at the Yoruba tradition and the devotion to an Orisha, or deity, named Oshun. Now, on the surface, these two things look like they're from different planets, right? One is a new internet-based thing about an internal companion. The other is this ancient spiritual tradition focused on an external deity. But if you look under the hood, the engine is the same. They both run on focused attention and story, whether it's a personal narration for a tulpa or these sacred myths called patakis for Oshun, to build a real, tangible relationship with a non-physical being. So who exactly is Oshun? In the Yoruba faith, she's a major Orisha who rules over everything that flows. Rivers, love, creativity, money, you name it. Her personality isn't written down in some single holy book. It's revealed through a whole collection of sacred stories, the patakis. And these myths aren't just bedtime stories. They're like the operating manual for understanding and connecting with her. And this gets to the very heart of it. Devotion to Oshun is seen as a partnership, a two-way street. Her followers believe that through offerings, prayer, and just living in a way that honors her, they feed her divine energy, this life force called Ashe. And in return, Oshun becomes this active co-creator in their lives, bringing sweetness, healing, and good fortune. It's a truly reciprocal relationship.
One of our sources uses this brilliant modern analogy to explain it. Think of Oshun not as being in just one place, but as a distributed being. It's like her consciousness is a single piece of software running on thousands of computers at the same time. Every single one of her devotees becomes a node, a place where her energy can live and act in the world.
Okay, so we have tulpamancers literally narrating a being into existence, and we have devotees of Oshun using ancient myths to connect with theirs. So what's the psychological bridge here? How can focused storytelling create such real, tangible experiences for people? The key concept here is a bit of a mouthful: interphenomenality.
But the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. Basically, when a whole group of people uses the same kinds of stories and focuses their attention in the same way, they start to have similar sensory experiences. The shared narrative literally creates a shared, felt reality. And this is exactly what we see happening. Both of these practices are profoundly physical and sensory. Tulpamancers train themselves to have auditory and tactile sensations. And devotees of Oshan don't just think about her, they feel her presence through the very physical sensory experiences of ritual, of dance, and even trance possession. The story becomes something you can feel in your body.
This all connects back to how we even build our own sense of self. The philosopher Galen Strawson suggested that we all fall somewhere on a spectrum. On one end, you've got diachronic people, who see themselves as one continuous character moving through their life story. And on the other, you have episodic people, who feel more like a collection of different selves living in disconnected moments. But here's the kicker. Both of those identities are constructed through a narrative. And this leads to a pretty radical idea from a researcher named Samuel Weisier. He suggests that all personhood, your own sense of I, my own sense of I, is created in the exact same way as a tulpa. It's induced over a lifetime of social feedback and joint attention, in a process he actually calls hypnotic. What that means is our main self is really just the tulpa that society and we ourselves have agreed to focus on the most. So if our sense of self is just a story, that means we have the power to edit it. We can even write new characters into it. And this is where we see the truly incredible, transformative power of these practices. This isn't just some mental party trick. It's a genuine tool for healing. And the impact is huge. Check this out. In one survey, a staggering 93.7% of tulpamancers reported that the practice has actively improved their lives. That's an absolutely incredible number. Now put that modern statistic right next to this quote from a devotee of Oshun. They describe her healing power as this process of radical self-acceptance, of learning to see and love all of yourself, even the hard, ugly parts. The methods are different, but the goal is exactly the same, creating a powerful new narrative centered on self-love. You just can't deny the parallels. People in both groups talk about overcoming anxiety, gaining confidence, healing from deep emotional trauma. By actively creating a new relationship, whether it's with an internal companion or a divine force, they are fundamentally rewriting their own inner scripts, turning old stories of loneliness into new stories of connection and love. Okay, so this brings us to the really big takeaway here. We've been looking at two very different communities, but the psychological mechanism they're using is universal. It's the engine of the human mind itself, storytelling. Whether we know it or not, every single one of us has an inner narrator. And psychological research shows that this narrator is constantly running, replaying emotional scripts we learned way back in our past. And these scripts aren't just memories. They're the filters that color how we see the present. They tell us if we're safe, if we're worthy, if we're lovable. Which brings us right back to that profound question from earlier. How literally should we take this idea that we become the stories we tell? I mean, if a tulpamancer can will a friend into existence with a story, and a devotee can co-create their reality with a myth, what does that say about the power of the everyday, personal story that you tell about yourself? So, here's the bottom line. These practices, as different as they seem on the surface, they reveal a fundamental truth about how our minds work. We are story-making machines. The narratives we choose to focus on, whether we do it consciously or not, have the power to shape everything, what we feel, what we perceive, and ultimately who we become. So the real question isn't about tulpas or orishas, it's about you. What story are you telling yourself, and is it the one you truly want to live?